Hello again, this is Douglas Williamson once again with Dr. Petra Kuenkel, and we're going to be continuing talking about her report to the Club of Rome, Stewarding Sustainability Transformations. Today we're going to be going a little bit more into the content of the book, and I'd like to ask Dr. Kuenkel, there's a big why at the beginning of this conversation, and the why really is about what is going on in the world that this book needed to be written. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the larger context as to why this book is important for the world.
Humankind is in a mess, and we are really at a crossroads of shifting towards a completely new way of operating as humankind in the world. This is absolutely clear with climate change. It is absolutely clear with transgressing planetary boundaries. There are so many facts and figures on the table that it is amazing how, let's say, slow the reaction is by humankind. So what is clear about the state of the world is that the facts and figures alone are not enough. We need to learn how to actually do the transformation processes. So this means that human agency will have to come into the forefront of how do we approach change. So we need to understand the state of the world as a collective leadership challenge, and that's what the book is dealing with.
When you talk about human agency related to these changes and related to these challenges, maybe you could talk a little bit about the connection of human agency to some of these specific challenges. You mentioned them, but is there a sort of equal approach and human agency to dealing with these challenges, or do they vary from one challenge to the next?
Well, what exactly do you mean?
So I mean that if you're talking about climate change, or you're talking about planetary boundaries, you're talking about biodiversity loss, is there a different approach for shifting human agency, or for fostering different kinds of human agency depending on the challenge, or is it basically the same thing?
I would say it is the same. It is the same, and at the same time, the challenge is that the facts and figures about like our sustainability challenges are pretty much removed from the day-to-day perception of people. If we talk about planetary boundaries, then in the science world, people know what they're talking about. But if you come down to the streets, then people would not know what this is about. So they can't relate, to something that is so extremely important for the future of our planet. And quite similar, maybe there's a bit of shift in biodiversity loss and in climate change. There are more people raising up to the challenge and say, no, we can't continue like this. But it is important to have a way of supporting human agency that can be done in academic circles, in politics, but actually also in the little next municipality project when you need to go about the change. So I think the empowerment of human agency is not issue-based. It is something general that relates to how we are with each other and how do we go about change collectively.
So I think it's interesting that you mention sort of different scales, but you do also mention a global agenda. We're talking about the state of the world, and we're talking about how human agency fits into transforming the world. However, you do mention all these different scales. But let's take it back up to the global scale, because I think this is sort of where this book is finding its home, is in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030 work. Could you talk a little bit about how this book intends to influence the discourse within the Agenda 2030?
There is one crucial point about what the message of the book, that I try to get across, and that is we need to understand that sustainability transformations are not just technical issues. So it is about bringing people on board. It is about reaching people's heart, but it is also about equipping people with the knowledge how we can accelerate transformative processes. So in that way, it is absolutely crucial, particularly for UN level processes, but also for national level processes, and in very, very specifically for multi-stakeholder initiatives, multi-stakeholder partnerships, and multi-stakeholder collaboration for SDG implementation or any other sustainability issue.
So I think this is a relatively new approach. I think it's not, it's been being talked about within the United Nations discourse for a while now. How do you expect this book to push this approach even further, to make it more impactful and to make it really land and become a part of that culture within this transformation effort?
The book gives you an architecture. An architecture is like an overarching framework or guide, but that is really anchored in a systems view of life. So it's not like only invented, it has its base on a thorough research, but it's also kind of checked and balanced with a practice approach in multi-stakeholder collaboration. People will get a guiding framework, a meta-level framework that helps them indeed plan their transformative change in a different way so that it becomes a life-enhancing process. And that's the crucial point, that we look at thrivability of systems, at systems aliveness, at kind of well-being of systems, etc. And the book is a direct guidance, for people to really take this up.
One of the things that you mentioned previously was a sort of a mindset shift, a shift in perspective, and some of the thought that's coming through in the conversation, as well as that's come through the sustainability discourse at the global level, is a systems perspective, the way of looking at things more as wholes and not as fragments. Could you talk a little bit about this aspect of perspectives and wholeness, or perspectives and systems?
See, what one needs to consider is that a systems view of life is about more than 100 years old. It originates in a lot of research that started in the 20th century of the last century. But still, and that is important to note, we are operating in a world that is dominated by linear thinking and a more mechanical way, and the feeling that things are in cause-effect relationships, like understandable and manageable. So the issue now is, how can this book support an integration of the existing worldview, that is more mechanistic worldview, and a more systemic worldview that's not new. I'm not the first one talking about this, but I've put it in a way, in a framework, that it is much more easy to integrate the linear way of planning with a non-linear planning that we actually need to do in sustainability transformations.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to thank Dr. Petra Kuenkel for this second episode of our blog series on her new report to the Club of Rome, Stewarding Sustainability Transformations. In the next episode, we'll be talking more about her meta concept and meta methodology, the collective leadership compass. Thank you.